Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be getting started shortly. We're very excited to have you here. This is the public forum as part of the Beverly ADU zoning project. We're just waiting for a few more folks to join, so we appreciate your patience as we get the digital room set up for everyone. Thanks so much. All right, thanks everyone for joining. I think we can go ahead and get started. So I'll turn it over to Darlene first.
Yes, I'm not on you, right? Okay, yes. Thank you everybody for joining us, and hopefully people keep coming in. But tonight we're going to talk about the Beverly ADU zoning project. The city of Beverly is working with MAPC, who is our regional planning agency, through a grant that we received a couple of years ago to do an analysis and study of changing or expanding our accessory apartment ordinance. It's currently called the Accessory Apartment Ordinance. We'd be looking at adding the ability of accessory dwelling units in a greater form, in different forms throughout the city. And I think one of the things that we really want to look at here, and the reason for having this meeting, is getting feedback and sharing information about what this means. The whole project is really interesting, and it's designed to be very data based, so that we can look at all the different impacts and figure out what type of expansions of the zoning ordinance may or may not be appropriate for the city of Beverly. I am Darlene Nguyen. I'm the planning director. So we're going to move in. We're going to do we're going to intersperse this presentation with some questions, and MAPC is going to make the presentation. So first of all, we're going to ask, who's here, and figure out who's participating in this meeting. No, I can't do it. So yes, so I think this one's pretty self-explanatory.
All right, I am going to end the poll and share the results. So it looks like 81% of the folks who took that poll are Beverly homeowners, and 8% are renters, and then 11% of folks don't live in Beverly. And I see some folks commenting in the chat what their connections are, so thanks for sharing, everyone.
Great, so next question. Which ward do you live in? And if we could go to the next slide, it does show the ward maps, the ward, in case you don't know. And hopefully if you got your census, some people might have realized that you might have been moved to a different ward. Happened to a few people.
All right, so I am going to end the poll and I'm going to share back the results. All right, so it looks like we've got a really healthy mix of folks who have attended, so that's really exciting. But there is somewhat of a clear leader, and that is Ward 4 with 24% of people. So thanks, everyone.
And I can't remember if this is the last question, but how did you hear about this public forum? This helps us to understand, you know, where our successes or not in advertising.
All right, so we have about 85% of folks. I see some additional answers sneaking in. So I am going to end the poll, and now I will share the results. Looks like from a city staff person or member of the steering committee is the most highly selected option, which is awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so sorry, I have to move that out of the way. So I guess that's the end of my bit, and MAPC, John is going to lead and introduce the MAPC team and move into the presentation.
Well, Darlene, thank you so much for that fantastic introduction. And it is just an absolute pleasure to be here with all of you who've decided to spend your evening with us to be able to talk about this really important issue around accessory dwelling units. My name is John Cruz. I am a senior planner in the Housing and Land Use Division at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. I'm joined tonight by some of our other project leads here, including Lily Perkins-High, who is our Analytical Services Manager, and Christian Brandt, who you've already gotten to meet a little bit as our Community Engagement Manager. We have a much larger team than what is represented here who's going to be working on this project, and these are just the folks that we brought out to interface with everybody here tonight. I'm working on the project management side, Lily's working on the decision support tool, and Christian is helping to make sure that we're reaching out and talking to as many people within the community as we can. And you're going to hear a little bit from Lily later on in the evening as she discusses her role in this project. A little bit about... Yes.
Really quickly, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but our interpreter is here, which is very exciting. So I was wondering if I could take just a second to get interpretation turned on and make sure that everyone who needs it is able to access it.
Please do so, Christian.
Awesome, thank you so much. So our interpreter, Brian, is here. I'm going to ask him to introduce himself in Spanish in just a second. And he will give some instructions about how to access interpretation. So Brian, feel free to unmute and introduce yourself.
Hola, muy buenas noches. Mi nombre es Brian. Yo trabajo como intérprete de español. Estoy aquí para ofrecer el servicio si es necesario. Dejándole saber que si usted necesita el servicio de intérprete, abajo de su pantalla hay un globito donde usted le puede hacer clic. Ahí va a tener las opciones de los diferentes idiomas donde usted pueda elegir de su preferencia. Nuevamente, mi nombre es Brian. Si necesita ayuda, por favor, déjenos saber vía chat o como sea para poderlo atender. Nuevamente, busque abajo de su pantalla. Hay un globito donde le va a dejar saber que hay los diferentes idiomas disponibles para la interpretación. Nuevamente, gracias y que tengan buenas noches.
Great, thanks, Brian. So I'm starting interpretation right now.
Thank you so much, Christian and Brian. A little bit about who we are at the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the kinds of work that we do, we were created in the 60s by state statute. We're a regional planning agency that serves primarily the communities surrounded by I-495. You can see all of them that we represent here. And of course, here's Beverly in the North Shore outlined in yellow so we can see how this community fits in with the rest of the region. And what we do is a lot of work helping cities and towns tackle local planning challenges. So the role that we have here is that we are working with the city of Beverly in a position where we're working as consultants, helping to understand what the right options are and kind of really make sure that when we go through with this, we're doing it the right way. And we're hopeful that between all of what we're working on and the feedback that we get from you all and the discussions that we've had with lots of other professionals who interface with accessory dwelling units around the region and around the country, we're going to be able to put together something that is really reflective of what the needs of this community are. That's the important part. So we are not the ones who are completely driving this. We are not the ones who have said this is for sure going to happen in Beverly. This is a partnership with the city. And like it was mentioned earlier when we talked about how everybody heard about this meeting, our steering committee of residents of Beverly have been absolutely fantastic rock stars, going out there talking to people, being advocates for just making sure that the word has gotten out. And I'm very excited to hear what everybody has to say throughout the course of the evening. A little bit on the project background here is that the primary goal of this effort is to update Beverly's accessory dwelling unit ADU ordinance through a community engagement process and data-driven support tool. The ordinance will need to be voted on and approved by the city council. We are optimistic that that will happen a little bit later on in the year once we've able to do all of our due diligence on the community engagement side, run through some different ways that this could play out, let the data side of this help to drive our decision making before we present to the city an ordinance for adoption. So that begs the question, okay, what is an ADU? I've said accessory dwelling unit. Maybe that means a whole lot to some of you, and maybe it means absolutely nothing to others. Well, so make sure that we're all kind of working with the same shared language here. An ADU is a secondary dwelling unit within the same lot as a larger primary dwelling unit. So this is an example of what's called a detached ADU, where we have the principal home over here near the street. And then further set in the backyard, there's a little walking path that leads to a smaller unit that would be in the backyard. This is not how all of them look, of course. This is just a very concrete example of what something like this could theoretically look like. This is a picture that shows some very common different types of ADUs that are developed. The first picture in the upper left where it says detached is another version of what we just looked at. There's also an attached version, which is really like building an addition onto your home to house somebody. An interior, either upper or lower. This would be, for instance, converting an attic or converting a basement. You could also convert the space above a garage or a carriage house, or completely convert the garage itself from going to something that has storage utility into something that has a living space component and would be suitable for someone to reside. So we're thinking about all the amenities that you would find in a home on a much smaller scale. And of course, for something detached, actually put into an actual foundation and have utilities run to it. So this wouldn't be like allowing for a tiny house to just be rolled up on a trailer and plopped in somebody's backyard or something like that. To take it a little bit out of the abstract and into the visual, here's a couple different examples. The above garage one over here on the left, you can see there's a little silver SUV parked here in front of this big red garage door and steps up the side. There's a little balcony coming out over the garage. If the balcony and the steps weren't there, it would look like any other type of home. The detached one shows a small kind of cottage looking dwelling in somebody's backyard. And then over on the right, we can see, again, what looks like a pretty typical neighborhood home where one of the floors has been converted into an ADU. So it becomes its own completely separate living space. And these are not photos from within the community. We didn't want to put anybody's house up on here for people to take a look at and criticize. So these are examples of ADUs that exist elsewhere in the United States. So if you think you've seen this before, the likelihood that would be was if you found out about us from the Facebook ad, because the image over here on the left is the one that we used for that. So we're going to move on to our next polling question now. And instead of stacking all these polls one after another and having just a prolonged Q&A session as we've moved forward, what we want to do is really take time to spread these out throughout the presentations. So now that we've talked a little bit about what an ADU is and a little bit around how they exist kind of out there in the world, have you ever been inside of one? And if so, can you tell us a little bit about in the chat kind of where that came from or what your experience has been like, so we can get an idea as far as, what your thoughts are and what your preconceived notions are. And the same thing, if you're selecting that you're not sure, let us know and we can help to kind of make heads or tails of that. I see
It looks
Grace
like
tell-
about 85% of folks have participated. So I'm going to leave a little bit more time to make sure everyone can. But I'm seeing in the chat that a lot of folks have a family home that might have a separate apartment out back. Someone here is from the building industry, so has been part of the construction process, which is very interesting. Some basement units. Lots of ADUs when looking for a new house. So I am going to end the poll and share the results. So it looks like more than half of you have been inside an ADU.
So thinking about the ADU experiences that you've had and maybe how that relates to what's gone on in Beverly. Beverly's current ADU ordinance is fairly restrictive. These are accessory apartments that are not intended to be permanent. They're supposed to be temporary. The idea is that they're limited to being either an attached to the primary dwelling, so an extension onto the home, or something within the primary home. So if we go ahead and take a look at our examples from a few slides ago again, Beverly really allows what is on the left and on the right currently. The standalone backyard cottage in the middle is currently not allowed. There's a maximum of 900 square feet, 2 bedrooms, and a maximum of 2 occupants. 2 parking spaces are required per unit, only 1 in the depot overlay district, because that's a bit of a special situation. In order to build an ADU, a special permit is required. There is nobody who has any availability to build one by right without going through that special permit process. And the residents of the ADU are restricted to either family members or caretakers. And upon that person leaving the occupancy, either through passing away or moving out or moving on to the next stage of their life, the regulations state that the kitchen has to be removed within 90 days of that happening, which, as you guys can imagine, is a little challenging to be able to enforce. So part of what we're looking to do here is to be able to see what our options are for making this a lot less restrictive and giving homeowners a lot more rights as far as what they can do with their property, and to hopefully be able to address some housing needs in the process. And we talked about this a little bit in the conversation that we had earlier in the have you been inside of an ADU before? So this kind of piggybacks off of that question. And now we want to know, do you personally know anybody that has an ADU, either yourself or a friend or family member? And so this isn't the same as if you've been in one, but if you know somebody who has one. Or potentially somebody who rents an ADU space from somebody else. As well, just in the name of transparency here, it looks like we're up to 48 attendees. For those of us that were not able to join right at 7 o'clock, welcome. My name is John Cruz. I'm with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. As we go through the presentation and have discussions around ADUs, we're going to be asking a lot of questions throughout, so that way we're not completely bombarded wall to wall with questions a little bit later on.
All right, so it looks like we have almost 90% of folks who've responded.
And this is a general question, so anybody with an ADU anywhere. It could be in Beverly, it could be in California, it could be in Hong Kong.
All right, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So it looks like 58% of you said that you do know someone with an ADU.
So we have a question in the chat asking about what does remove the kitchen entail, removing stove, plumbing, etc. My understanding is that would be disconnecting anything that is hooked up and then converting the space back into something else. So if you have a stove and a washer dryer and other kitchen appliances, that those would be taken out, and the ability to add them back in would no longer be an option. And I don't know if, Darlene, you have any other additional clarification on that from Demo in the chat, but that's my general understanding of how that would work.
Agreed. Yep, I think you're right.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for clarifying for us. So when we talk about the desire here to update the existing ordinance, a few things that we want to keep in mind are that ADUs in Beverly would remain rental options only. The owner versus renter tenure is not part of the zoning code, so there isn't anything where there are certain parts of the city that are zoned for ownership or zoned for renter. That's not how this works. And short-term rentals are not identified as a permitted use in any zoning district. So these would be rentals that would be multi-month long, not somebody just stopping in for the night or 2 nights or things like that. There are some questions in the chat asking about what would be needed if another family member would move in order to replace that. And these are part of the concerns that we're looking to address, because this is something where the ordinance is a little bit restrictive and we can run into issues like that. So for instance, if there was a family member who moved out of an ADU and there's somebody else who wants to move in and can't do it for maybe 6 months, the law does not currently allow that to happen. Enforcement is obviously a different story. But we can see this creates a lot of potential conflicts that are not easy to sort out or easy to resolve. And that's part of the reforms that we're going to be looking to enact here with a new ordinance to help clear up some of that language and make it a little bit easier to be able to do things like that. The three-pronged approach that we have to doing this and getting this ADU ordinance updated is doing the actual work in the policy research and understanding all the things that have made these ADU ordinances successful in other communities. In addition to the community engagement angle, which has been all the work that we're doing here tonight, it's been a lot of different conversations with folks throughout Beverly, throughout other communities, with other people who have a lot of experience working on different sides of this. And then being able to build a tech-based decision support tool to help us to really make sure that this is a data-driven process. And I know that's a lot of jargon. Really what we're talking about is being able to say, well, if the ordinance looks like this, what exactly is the implementation of that? What would it actually look like? And Beatrice has a question in the chat: would standalone detached buildings be allowed as part of the new zoning? That's one of the things that we're thinking about figuring out here. So we're going to have some questions and conversations a little bit later on asking what people's thoughts are about that. I think it is something that we would likely want to work in, but we have to make sure that if we're going to do it, we're going to do it right. Before we get to that, I'm going to turn it over to Lily Perkins-High, who is our Analytical Services Manager, and she's going to tell us a little bit about the data-driven support tool.
Great. Thanks, John, and hi again, everyone. Again, my name is Lily Perkins-High, and I work as the Analytical Services Manager at MAPC. I'm going to offer a few more details about what we mean when we say decision support tool, because that language is a little bit clunky. Essentially, what we're building with the city and the team here at MAPC is a tool, in actuality, an automated analysis that allows us to articulate different zoning policy in terms of potential outcomes. Specifically, how many homeowners in Beverly might legally be able to pursue the development of an ADU under a specific policy, what types of ADUs those homeowners could legally build, and where those properties are located in Beverly, which should give us a broad sense of the impacts of a given policy. We're also planning to introduce a second level of analysis, so beyond kind of strictly what is legal or illegal under a certain ordinance, to kind of dig in deeper to describe what properties in Beverly might actually kind of take up the option of constructing an ADU, and that's going to be based on how easy or difficult it would be to construct an ADU on a property. The result of that tool, the result of all of that work will just be a series of what we would call summary statistics for each of the zoning policies under consideration, and a map showing what parcels might be eligible to kind of receive those ADUs. So just to go into a tiny bit more detail with an example, let's imagine the detached ADU example that John provided earlier. A possible ADU zoning ordinance might say that only properties above a certain acreage are eligible to construct a detached ADU. What the tool would do is it would read in that input. We would tell, kind of instruct the tool about those specific thresholds. And then the tool would take those thresholds and essentially say that parcels below that acreage would not be eligible to construct an ADU. It's going to read in probably 20 to 30 different inputs. So it's going to be a lot more complicated than that, but that is kind of in its most simplest form, what we're trying to do with our decision support tool. Back to you, John.
Thank you so much, Lily. I
Yeah.
appreciate you taking the time this evening to talk with us about all of that. Hopefully that gives a little bit of clarification on what we're doing. And the idea that we really want to hammer home here is that we're not just going to go out here and cowboy this thing and say, you know what, we're just going to try something and see if it works. And, you know, if it does great, if not, oh, well, we really want to make sure that this is set up for success and that everybody has a good idea as far as what's going to happen, because we know there's going to be a lot of questions from the public, questions from the elected officials, questions from people in the city. And we want to make sure that we can answer those in a way that's beyond just, well, here's what we think. And thank you to everybody who is here joining us tonight, who is making sure that you are receptive to hearing that message. So I get the feeling that a lot of folks on the call have a good idea as far as what I'm about to say. If it seems like a lot of people have experience either with an ADU on their property or have friends that own one or stay in one. And when we talk about why we're doing this and what the need is that this provides a housing options for a really wide range of demographics. We're talking about seniors who want to downsize, say, I got this big house, I don't really need all this space, but I don't want to move away from all my friends and my community and my church and whatever else I might be doing. Multiple generational households where you want to keep your friends and family really close. Smaller households, including young adults and people that don't need what the market is currently able to provide. Lower income households who look at what's happening in Beverly and saying, you know what, there's just no way that we could live here. We're early in our careers. We don't have these sorts of established salaried positions yet, but we want to get close to where this job is. And ultimately, there just isn't a place for that. People with disabilities, young adults. There's a lot of different folks that could kind of fall into this bucket of people who would benefit greatly from accessory dwelling units. And even though they're colloquially referred to as things like in-law apartments or granny flats or things like that, there are a lot of different people who could benefit from having this type of housing available. It's also a really great potential source of income for homeowners, especially as people start to age in place. Being able to look at something like this and say, you know what, I can build something that can turn into a little bit of some rental income for me, or I could downsize and move into a smaller home on the back of my lot and rent out the principal building and get a lot more money that way. And that way it avoids people going through any sorts of predatory processes, such as additional mortgages or reverse mortgages or anything like that, where people start to worry about how to survive on a fixed income, because as we all know, inflation is a thing, rising costs of living are a thing, and those are even independent of what happens with rent and property taxes and things like that. So incomes stay the same, prices go up, people get squeezed a little bit. A lot of these longtime homeowners are looking for a new source of income that isn't going to be predatory. We also see it as it's a fairly conservative, low impact strategy for increasing the housing supply. And looking at where this sort of housing is kind of falling into this kind of missing middle housing, we see this as a way of being able to steadily increase the housing supply throughout the city and hopefully throughout the region as other cities and towns look to adopt this sort of legislation in a way that doesn't drastically change neighborhoods. You don't turn around the corner and say, oh my goodness, this beautiful park now has a 6-story building that's casting a shadow and I can't sit in my same spot and hang out anymore. It's low impact. It doesn't change the demographics of a neighborhood much. It doesn't change the population of neighborhoods a whole lot. and it doesn't drastically alter the built environment. So when you're walking down the street or driving around town, it won't look drastically different if somebody's basement's been converted or if there's a small house in the backyard. So we really do see it as a low impact way of being able to address this stuff and to keep the community, you know, really what it is and why people choose to live in Beverly. They like the town character. You guys know all that stuff. You know why you love living in the town that you live in. We don't want to make it a different place. We want to be able to add more options that are going to keep that. The housing in Beverly is, however, in really short supply, and the population grew almost 1% per year over the last 10 years, which is a bit. Housing options haven't been as greatly expanded. Almost all new housing built in the past 5 years or so has been in and around downtown, which for a lot of people is great. Not everybody enjoys living in downtown, and we saw that there's a vast representation of the wards here this evening. So, you know, you guys understand this. You picked a part of town that you really loved. You picked a home and a property and a piece of the world that you really love. And if we build all the new housing downtown, you end up with a really, really dense downtown and a really low dense rest of the city. And it doesn't give a whole lot of options for people who are looking to move in. Housing costs for both ownership and existing rentals are often unaffordable for a lot of people. And when we talk about affordability, that is it's defined by the Department of Housing and Urban Development at the federal level and at the census, and it's about 1/3 of the household income or less. So anybody who's spending more than 1/3 of their income before taxes are taken out, that's considered to be unaffordable. When we think about where this fits into the need of housing, not just in Beverly, but throughout the region, when we look at Greater Boston, housing built from 1990 to 2020, so give or take the past 30 years, it's not nearly as much as was built between 1960 and 1990. Despite that, we're not seeing a decline in population. We're not seeing a leveling off of population. We're seeing population increase. It's a very desirable part of the world. People want to come here. People want to live here. And making sure that we're able to have all of our needs met in our local economy and make sure that we have people who are able to come out and call this a home and be able to make it work and have a life for themselves, we need to make sure that housing is available to do that. So when we look at ADUs, low impact, helping to address a need, addresses a wide range of concerns for a lot of different demographics who are strongly affected by all of this, and could potentially help to stabilize incomes of folks who are looking to age in place and stay in Beverly for as long as they're around on this planet. So we've talked a lot about what some of the good points are with all of this, but of course, with anything else, you know, there's a lot of concerns with it. You know, we're talking about modifying what's going to be going on in neighborhoods. We're talking about affecting people's homes, which for the vast majority of us, it's our largest financial investment that we make, and we want to make sure it's going to be well taken care of. So we're going to move on to our next polling question here around what are your biggest housing concerns for the city, and what are the things that you see is really a concern in Beverly. And the options that we have in place are aging in place, so housing for retirees and the elderly, needing to downsize, housing for young adult children, people who are getting started in their careers or maybe still going through college, people who are first-time home buyers that have a hard time of being able to make those minimal down payments, people with few rental options, or if there's something else entirely that we should have included in here but didn't, please let us know in the chat. We'll be happy to talk about it.
So we've got some responses rolling in. And just to clarify, this is a single choice question, so you do have to pick what your top concern is. I'll give it a little bit longer because I know that this is a lot to think about. But I see in the chat, some folks have added affordability of both purchase and rental costs, rising rental costs. Ditto. Affordability is another one that someone else has added as well. We have about 76% of people who've responded, so now is your time to vote in the poll. I'm going to give it about 10 more seconds if you haven't had the chance to vote yet. All right, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So it looks like aging in place was the option selected by most people, but I'm also seeing that a lot of folks have commented in the chat about affordability. So that is a useful note for us to have. All right, thanks everyone.
Thank you so much, Christian. We're going to keep right on moving here. Thank you to everyone who's added your comments into the chat as well. That's been extremely helpful, helping us to understand your context and your point of view. So when we think about how these ADUs will directly affect Beverly in and of itself, so not just the concerns around housing, but the concerns around the town and how the neighborhood will be affected. Because at the end of the day, we do see this as low impact and making sure that we are not doing anything that's going to drastically change neighborhoods, but there are going to be some concerns around what's going to happen. So what we put together is our initial list of potential concerns are parking, overcrowding, changing the neighborhood character, nuisance activities such as additional noise that comes with an additional density potentially, stormwater, sewer capacity, tree cover being affected. And we have the next polling question ready to go that is going to address this. So share with us what your concerns are. Share with us what you think is going to be, when you see this effort and you say, these are the things that I would be skeptical about welcoming something like this in. If you have them, please let us know. Vote on it. Talk about it in the chat. We want to hear what you have to say.
All right, thanks everyone. And just to note, the question text was cut off by Zoom. It wouldn't support our question being as long as it was. But the full question is, what are your concerns about how ADUs may affect your neighborhood?
And I wanted to add, I think people have seen it, but you can scroll down if you don't see all the options too.
Great, thank you, Darlene. That's a good addition.
And this one is multiple choice, so feel free to select all the concerns that you have. I'm seeing a question from Wayne in the chat asking about these options will lead to greater or lesser carbon intensity for residents. And I think that is a great question that I'm not prepared to answer at this time. I think we're going to need to do a little bit of research and figure out kind of what the carbon implications of this is.
All right, so about 60% of folks have responded, and I see some folks are adding additional comments in the chat, which is great. Thank you so much. If you haven't had the chance to respond, please do so now. I'm going to give us 15 more seconds, and then I'll end the poll.
I'm seeing a lot of comments in the chat as well about maintaining affordability. That's going to be one of the questions that we are going to discuss in just a little bit. So I'm glad to hear that everybody is kind of in that headspace right now.
All right, so I shared the results. It looks like there is a tie for the first place, and that is parking and changing the neighborhood character.
Fantastic, everyone. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. Those are definitely things that we are thinking about as we figure out how to draft this ordinance, kind of what is the right balance for things like parking and making sure that neighborhoods don't become overtaxed. And we certainly don't want to see a situation where the neighbors are inconvenienced by something going else on somebody else's property. When we start really thinking about everything related to how we are going to put all of this together, including the ordinance itself, and these are the key decisions. So these are the things that are going through our team's mind as we're looking to learn and process all of this information. So we're looking at 3 different buckets: location, dimensions, and design, in addition to the process and the people. For location dimensions and design, we're thinking about where would these be allowed, what types are allowed, and what are the design and parking requirements for the ADUs? How should they look? Where should they go? What should the parking requirements be? We've touched on the other two a little bit already, thinking about, are things going to be allowed based on lot size, based on neighborhood? Would things be more or less restrictive based on where the property is, as well as the types of ADUs allowed in those locations? And it's possible that these could be completely blanket for the entire city. It's possible that we could have a different way of looking at it. We're still in the process of figuring that out. We wanted to share with you guys exactly what it is that we're thinking, so that way we're being fully transparent and giving everybody the opportunity to respond to it. As far as the process goes, we're thinking about how things are permitted for accessory dwelling units. Is this the kind of thing that would still require a special permit? Should they be allowed by right some places, everywhere? Should there be another way of going through this? And then the restrictions under people, restrictions on who is allowed to live in an ADU, or how many bedrooms or occupants would be allowed, how many ADUs allowed total. There's a lot of different ways that we can think about this. For anybody who's replying in the chat, if you reply to, I don't think that everyone gets the everyone option. If you say attendees, we will see that as the panelists, as the people who are giving the presentation. So whatever it is that you type it out to attendees. If you have a question that you don't want asked publicly, or if you would like to send us something and say, hey, this is something you guys need to know about, this is something I'm concerned about, I want to have a conversation offline, then you would just go ahead and send it to the panelists. I'm not sure if you can send it to one of us directly, but that's the way that it would go. To answer the question about the recording, we are recording this. It will be posted online for viewing. We have a website set up on our MAPC website that directly talks about this effort. Everybody who is registered to be part of this webinar will get an email from me that outlines all of this when all of that stuff is online, and it will likely be on the city's website as well. We've had some conversations with them in order to make all of that happen. So this is where we're at. This is how our team is thinking about how to solve this problem, and all the other different aspects of all the things that we have to look at in order to make sure that we're addressing everything that we need to address moving forward. And all of these key decisions are what the questions are based off of. It's based on how the decision support tech tool is being put together and everything else that we're doing here. And neighborhood character has been a big topic of conversation here tonight. And I want to take some time to think about this a little bit deeper, and think about the things that you really love about being in Beverly. Think about the reasons that drew you to the city to begin with, and all the reasons why, when you talk to your friends and family who live in different parts of the region or the country or the world, you get to brag a little bit and say, yeah, I live here and it's really, really fantastic and I'm happy I did it and this is why. So when we're talking about adding something new to the mix and making it a little bit less restrictive and giving homeowners a little bit more freedom, how important is that the new dwellings really match what's going on? And this is our next polling question. And the options are extremely important, thinking that the architectural styles of the ADU would be completely complementary to the main house. This primarily has to do with if you have a detached ADU, like a small cottage in the backyard. It could be somewhat important. Maybe some liberties are taken in design, as long as the design still looks good. And I know good is very subjective and could mean a lot of things. You could say that it's not important at all. Reducing the cost burden on the property owner should be valued over aesthetics. Or maybe you don't know or you don't care and you're like, look, as long as this gets done and the housing gets built, what it looks like is not really a concern of mine. So we want to kind of hear where everybody's head is at on this one, and this is a single choice question. So please choose the answer that best fits with what your worldview is. And if you feel the need to clarify or feel as though you're not being represented here, please let us know in the chat so we can take a look.
All right, so I'm seeing about 82% of people have participated, which is great. I'm going to leave the question up for a little bit longer. So I'm seeing some responses trickle in. All right, I'll give us about 10 more minutes or 10 more seconds, not minutes, excuse me. All right. I am going to end the poll and share the results. It looks like the number one response was that it is somewhat important that the ADU match the existing character of the neighborhood. Some liberties can be taken as long as things still look good.
Thank you so much, everyone. We're going to keep moving right along here. And now we're going to think about the ADU types in this pretty much the same slide that we talked about earlier. We have a garage conversion, we have a detached ADU, and over on the right we have a floor conversion ADU where either a basement or an attic or a floor has been converted into its own standalone accessory dwelling unit inside the principal building. So we're thinking about these three different types of options, and of course the impact of them is a little bit different. And we're speaking generally, and I know there's no such thing as an absolute, so use your imaginations with me a little bit this evening. And generally speaking, how would you feel about an attached ADU in your neighborhood? If you knew, or maybe you got a letter in the mail that said, hey, somebody is putting something together, or you heard your neighbors talking about it at a party, or they approached you about it, how would you feel about an attached ADU? So a converted basement, a home addition, or something to that effect. And it's highlighted over here with the green box around it. So we're thinking, how would you feel about it generally? Would you be likely to support it? Would you be likely to not support it? Or would you not be sure? And then the second question here is, would your level of support change if you knew the details about the project? And please answer both of these questions individually so we can get an idea as far as what these differences are. We're trying to understand how specific we're really thinking about this problem, and how specific we're thinking about addressing it as far as generalizations versus, quote unquote, the devil being in the details. There's a question in the chat. We're talking about the character of the neighborhood. We are focusing solely on the physical characteristics and the design characteristics of the ADU itself and how it fits into how the neighborhood currently looks. We're not talking, for instance, about demographic changes or anything like that.
All right, so it looks like about 80% of folks have responded, so I'll give us about 10 more seconds. And I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So it looks like 91% of people responded that they would be likely to support it. 9% said that they might be unsure. And with regard to the second question, would your level of support change if you knew more details about the project? The 51% is pretty evenly split, but 51% of people said that the specifics would determine if I would feel good about a project. But 42% of people said the specifics would not matter. I would feel good regardless.
So as we keep on moving here, we're going to be thinking about the exact same question, but we're talking about a detached ADU and not an attached one. So when we look at that, now we're talking about maybe a converted garage that's off-site, or a small cottage that would be in the backyard, or something to that effect. So when we think about this, the exact same questions. Would you be inclined to support a detached ADU in your neighborhood? Generally speaking, yes, no, not sure. And then would it depend on what the level of detail would be for something like that as to whether or not you would support it? There's a question, there's a couple questions I want to address. One of them is from Paul Drake. Perhaps it would be helpful to know some key examples of such details that could affect other neighbors. I think it's really a subjective question at that point, Paul, when we're talking about, maybe I would be okay with an ADU if it was only 1 story, but if it was 2 stories and 300 square feet per story, I could be against it. Maybe it has to do with making sure that the setbacks are adhered to, and the ADU has to still be 5 or 6 feet away from my property, things like that. Scott Hausman has a question on what is the definition / geographic scope of neighborhood and who gets to define that. My understanding is that the neighborhoods are kind of loosely defined in Beverly, but they are defined in the comprehensive plan. So that is what we would be using to define the geographic scope of what a neighborhood is. And I think that in the comprehensive plan, there are 10 distinct neighborhoods identified in Beverly. But really what we're thinking about is in relation to all the other nearby buildings on the nearby blocks, as we start thinking about how will this fit into what's there, would we be opposed to it or not opposed to it. So somewhere nearby, somewhere that you may be likely to drive by on your way to and from work when everyone's back in the office again, or just how it would affect somewhere nearby. Like you would look at these folks and say, these would be my new neighbors.
All right. So it looks like 83% of folks have responded to this question. So I'm going to end the poll. I just want to give a little bit of a warning before I do that, in case there's some last minute votes. But there were, so I'm glad I did. I'm going to end the poll now, and I'll share the results. So for detached ADUs, the results are a little bit less conclusive. So 67% said that they were likely to support it. 13% said unlikely, and 20% said that they would be unsure. And with regard to the second question, many more people indicated that, or a higher percentage of people at least indicated that the specifics would determine if they would feel good about the project.
And thank you so much to everyone who's continuing to voice your comments and opinions in the chat around what you feel like would work or would not work, or what your other concerns are. Those are going to be really, really helpful for us. There's a question about how would it affect the lot size if the property is wetlands? And one of the really fantastic things that I really love about Beverly is the fact that there is such a wide range of different geological features and different physical features of the land. And that is certainly one of the things that we're going to be looking at as we look to build out these tech tools that are going to be helping the decision making, is looking at the developable part of the land to make sure that it's something that can actually be done. And in addition to that, there are potentially going to be things that tool misses, and we won't always know. For instance, wetlands might change a little bit, that we do have some federal data sets that we can look at and take a look and see what is determined a wetland. But ultimately, these are things that you're still going to have to be working with engineers and architects on, who are going to have to sign off on the plans and sign and seal them and make sure that everything is going to be structurally sound. There's going to have to be foundations built and everything else. So if the reality of the situation is that, when you look at the developable part of the land where there isn't already something built and that doesn't potentially have, rock features or the side of a mountain or wetlands that you can't build on, it will definitely affect the ability to build on that lot a detached ADU, or even, for instance, an attached ADU that would be an extension or on the principal building, if that's the situation. So a lot of this is going to be largely dependent on the piece of property. We're going to make some assumptions based on kind of what our data sets tell us and what our tech tools run and are able to kind of make work. And we will see all that stuff as a guide and a starting place for the city to be able to assist property owners in determining as to whether or not these projects are feasible. And all of that is certainly going to be part of those conversations. And if you had an undevelopable wetland and went to an architect or engineer and said, I want you to design me an ADU for this property, I think the response would be, you know what, we're going to take an honest look and assessment at this and then make a decision as to whether or not that's even possible. So with all that in mind, and we've had a really fantastic conversation over the course of the past hour, we're thinking about putting all of it together at this point. So we're going to shift gears just a little bit and thinking about all the different ways that we could make this happen. And we've gotten a lot of really fantastic feedback in the polling, in the chat, all the other conversations we've had with a lot of different people. And as we pull all these different aspects together, we really want to make sure that we're creating an ordinance here that's reflective of people's wants and needs, of what the community doesn't have that it should have to address these needs that we're talking about. We're talking about key decisions and lessons learned from other places that are helping us to craft this ordinance. So what we do is take a look at it and say, you don't want to invent the wheel, but we also know there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all approach in policy. So what are things that we can do to see what other cities have done, what has worked for them, what hasn't? And these best practices are really only valuable if they fit into the local context. So we will not just be copying and pasting what happened in a nearby community and saying, yeah, we're going to do this, even if that community is Salem right across the bridge, who had a recently enacted ADU ordinance in the past couple years. And so because of this, there's a lot of different ways that a law can be drafted to ensure that, what the community needs to see happen is going to happen, to make sure that the housing needs can accurately and properly be addressed. So we are exploring some of these different types of ordinance scenarios to craft this ordinance, with the tech tool helping to see how these scenarios may play out. And we're thinking about this from a very sort of high level approach. And these high-level, big-picture approaches to an ordinance can play out in a lot of different ways. These are some of the thoughts that our team has been discussing internally, and I would like to share them with you right now. None of these are final. None of them are set in stone. They're still very much in the preliminary phases of discussion and talking through them. But I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on what you think would make the most sense based on all the things that we've talked about today and all the things that you've read shared from everybody else. And this is going to be our next polling question. An ADU in Beverly should take the approach based on a neighborhood or part of its city and its characteristics. So maybe certain neighborhoods can have some things done, other neighborhoods can't. Something that would be encouraging ADU development around the commuter rail stations as a priority over the rest of the city. Focused on racial equity. So maybe there would be for instance, a impactful ADU ordinance that would allow for different restrictions based on the diversity or some other kind of qualifier for the neighborhoods. Or should this be something that our team shouldn't even be concerned about? We should have just one law that affects everybody in the city the same way, and we should use that as the driver to make sure that whatever else happens is done in the best way possible. Or should we be looking at something else? Is there something that we haven't really had thoughts on that we should be having a discussion on? And if that's so, please let us know in the chat so we can think about it a little bit.
All right, so it looks like about 65% of people have responded. There are a few more answers trickling in, so I'm going to give us maybe 15 more seconds. It's definitely a lot to think about. All right. I see some answers rolling in. And I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So in response to an ADU ordinance in Beverly should take an approach, the option that was most selected was treats everywhere in the city equally.
Thank you, Christian. I'm going to take a second to address some of the concerns here in the chat. There was a question about prefabricated buildings that could be brought onto the site. And that's not something that we've discussed as of this point, and that's not something that would necessarily fit into any one of these scenarios. That's really more of a construction decision. As I mentioned earlier, it would very well still be a situation where this would need to be a permanent building that is affixed to the property. So a foundation would need to get built and poured. There would need to be utility lines, water, sewer, gas, electric, all that kind of stuff going into the building. So whatever it is that happens, it would need to be a permanent structure and not a temporary structure or something that could easily be moved off site. That being said, we haven't discussed any specifics around prefabricated stuff as of yet. Laura asked a question around where anybody who is pushing back on this would be. They could be here right now and not saying a whole lot. I think that we will certainly be hearing from them throughout the course of this process, and we have heard from some of them already. And thank you so much for everybody else who has lots of other comments in here with some anecdotal observations from the community. The next question that we have is around affordability, and we're thinking about what is it that needs to be done, if anything, when we look at what the rents should be here. So when we think about ADUs in Beverly, do you think they should be income restricted, in which case it would be subject to the affordable housing lottery? Should it be restricted in another way? Should it be left to the market to decide what fair market rent should be, knowing that it's a smaller unit and it would likely command less rents than a full house on a standalone piece of property? Or maybe you're not sure. Or if you have other thoughts, please go ahead and post this in the chat.
John, I actually don't have this question in our polls.
Okay.
So if people would be willing to just share their answer in the chat, that would be great. Apologies.
Yeah. No, that would be fantastic. And this has been a comment that's kind of come up throughout the rest of the evening in here. Could ADUs for lower income residents count towards 40B credits on a town or city? That is something that I will need to look into. One of our planners, Josh Fiala, is on the call tonight. Josh, I don't know if you can answer that for ADUs and 40B. If not, we will take a look at it. And I'm seeing lots of comments coming through. A lot of discussions on the market, a lot of discussions on restrictions.
Yeah, John, I could offer a comment just related to the affordability in 40B. It can count towards the town's subsidized housing inventory, which is what 40B is working toward to get to that 10% marker, which is the statutory threshold for the communities in Massachusetts. But it probably wouldn't be through 40B exactly. I think it would be through a local affordable unit, local initiative unit, or some other mechanism to make that affordability count towards the subsidized housing inventory.
Thank you so much, Josh. I appreciate you lending your thoughts. There's a question that says, if I put an ADU and have an affordable rent, can I get a tax break from the city on property taxes? That is definitely something that we could consider putting into the ordinance. We haven't yet taken a good look at the incentivized portion of what this would look like just yet. I'm not sure if that would be one ordinance or something separate, but that's certainly a piece that we are looking at and considering in order to move this forward. And that is a conversation I've had with some other folks who have done ADU policy research and trying to figure out what they can do in order to spur people's interest and get them interested in building these. There is a question about the lottery, and that would be the affordable lottery that is run by the state to see who would qualify, and they verify people's incomes and things like that. All right, everyone, thank you so much. We are going to keep on moving. And now we're thinking about things not from the side of the tenants, but from the side of the people who own the property. And think about it, if you're a homeowner in Beverly and you're thinking about putting together an ADU, what would your top concern be? Would it be trying to make sure you can pay for the project, dealing with all the inconvenience of construction and people out there working and hammering and painting and sawing? Would it be dealing with everything with the city through all the regulatory hurdles that you need to get to? Finding a tenant? Not really sure. Haven't thought about it. Can't think of an answer right now. Or there's something else entirely that you'd like to share with us? And if so, please do so in the chat. There's a question about what would people want to keep an in-law apartment for its intent intact for future use or for resale value. Hopefully moving forward, we are envisioning this in a way that the in-law apartments, ADUs, whatever it is that you want to call them, would be permanent and intact moving forward. They're not allowed to be for right now, but the idea is that once you build this on your property, you would be allowed to have it as just part of your property moving forward. So it would have an effect on the resale value. It would have an effect on future use. There wouldn't necessarily need to be a stipulation as far as occupancy goes. And there's a lot of different ways people can be creative with how they've used them in the past. Some people build them as guest homes. If you're having a lot of family over for the holidays or something like that, and you're like, you know what, mom and dad are great, but they really need to stay on the other side of the yard most of the time, and things like that. So this is another creative way that people can find more use out of their property. But the idea is that we would not want this to be restricted to a specific person or persons moving in, and instead being something that is just part of the property moving forward.
All right, so it looks like about 80% of folks who are here have responded to the building an ADU question. So I'm going to give it a little bit more and end the poll in probably 5 seconds. All right, and sharing the results. So it looks like the number one concern regarding building an ADU would be financing for the project. But oh, I see it's actually tied with working through red tape with the city.
Thank you guys so much. That's very helpful to help understand that perspective. We have a question in the chat asking if a basement ADU added to my assessed living space for tax purposes. And to be honest with that, Matt, I don't think there's going to be a substantial change in people's taxes as a result of this, regardless of if it is a attached or detached ADU. Obviously, a lot of things go into assessing the value of a property. One of the things that's challenging on our end to really be able to answer that question concretely is that the ADUs are things that have really seen a lot of increase in popularity in the past 20 years or so. And in addition to that happening just the way that it's happened, we've also seen properties rising in value really substantially. And because the property values are rising substantially for just about everybody, we don't have a lot of concrete evidence that says an ADU is altering that one way or another, but it's hard to know until property values stabilize a little bit more. So I don't see it as being a tremendous burden. I don't think anyone's taxes are going to go up substantially as a result of this. We're going to have some more conversations with the city assessor's office and get their thoughts on how this has worked. Beverly currently has about 15 permitted ADUs over the past couple years. I personally took a look at every single one of them to see if it looked like their taxes were changing drastically compared to their neighbors, and I couldn't find anything. But again, like I said, everyone's property values are going up, everyone's taxes are going up, regardless of whether or not they have an ADU. So it makes it really hard to look at that and draw any conclusions. So as it stands right now, we really can't answer something like that. Based on evidence and things that we've seen from other case studies throughout the country, I don't think anyone needs to worry about their tax bill going up any more than what they've kind of seen as a result of just existing lately. As we move forward and give everybody an idea as far as how we are looking to have this presented, a lot of work that was done last year in the winter time was we were putting together our advisory committee to help us work our way through all of this, our advisory steering committee. We've done the analysis of past planning and are working on the tool development. We are now in the spring. We are having our identify ADU options section going through. So we have our public forum. That's today. Thank you all so much for being part of that with us. We are going to keep working on developing the potential ADU policy options and scenarios and continue working on this tech tool. Soon we will begin drafting an ordinance that we will be able to present to the planning board and be able to do some initial public outreach and some digital campaign work to make sure everybody's aware of this. And our goal is that we will have something ready to be turned into the city in the summertime at some point. This is the ADU ordinance that we've put together, and then the city will be able to put that onto a path for adoption when their boards and commissions and council are able to take that up. There's a comment from Ellen in here saying that she works in the assessing field and believe income generating nature of ADUs would certainly affect property values. Ellen, my contact information is going to be coming up on a slide shortly. Please send me an email. I am more than happy to discuss this with you and discuss what your findings are versus things that I've seen. And Christian just put that in the chat as well. Thank you so much for doing that. So that wraps up the presentation and kind of official Q&A portion of our back and forth for this evening. I would like to completely open up the floor to anybody who has questions that we have not yet discussed. We want to make sure that we're respectful of everybody's time. So our goal is to wrap things up within the next 17 minutes or so that we're done by 8:30. A question from Beatrice asking, how soon will the recording be available? It should be very soon. I think early next week we'll be able to reach out to everybody and let them know that it's up online so that they can take a look at everything.
Thanks, John. I'm just looking through the chat to make sure that we didn't miss any questions, although I think you captured almost all of them during the presentation. But just want to make sure. Lots of really great comments now that I'm looking back through the chat. So we really appreciate everybody sharing their thoughts.
Yeah, well, we really do appreciate everybody's frankness and honesty throughout this process. There's a question about how are we going to prevent them from being sold off as condos? And that is a great question. So we're not entertaining any options that would allow a parcel to be split. So we would look at this and say, this is still one parcel of land. There is one deed that goes with it. There is the land and the building improvements that are on it. So the same way you wouldn't be able to sell off, for instance, your garage or your tool shed or something like that to somebody else, that we would not be allowing these to be sold separately. All of the land and the improvements on it, the principal buildings, the accessory buildings, the accessory dwellings would all be a part of that. So we don't see any option moving forward where these would be sold individually. Somebody would be buying everything that is on that piece of land.
John, I am noticing that earlier on in the chat, somebody asked, when this program is posted, I hope the attendance numbers and the chat and the poll results are included. Will each of these be posted? Typically, speaking from my experience as the community engagement manager at MAPC, we of course will post the recording. Poll results can also be visualized and we can share that as well. We don't typically post the chat, so that's something that I will connect with John and the city about, but certainly the poll results will be available to folks.
There's a question about whether an ADU would be allowed to be built on a property where condos already exist. I think that's going to be unlikely, and it's going to be unlikely for a lot of reasons. And even if it was something that was built into the ordinance that said that we didn't explicitly forbid that, I think that the homeowners associations for those condos and the condo boards would not allow it. So I don't think it's likely that there's a situation moving forward where condos would have ADUs as part of them. There's a question about would the current setbacks and regulations be enforced on an ADU, and that's something that we're trying to figure out. And as of right now, I think the answer is probably. We're going to have to look at that and see what happens if the setbacks are always adhered to. Does that eliminate a lot of ADUs from being built? As I'm sure a lot of you know, there's some small lot sizes. There's lot sizes where the principal building takes up a good portion of the lot, and there could be some challenges around restricting someone's rights to build an ADU if they don't have a variance that would allow them to bypass those setback requirements. So we're looking on figuring out what that is and what that looks like. As of right now, I can't give you a solid answer one way or another. It's just one of the things that we are being very mindful of and that we're trying to make sure that we're looking at and we can kind of make sense of. If someone's property is large enough, would more than one ADU be allowed? I don't see a scenario moving forward that would allow that to happen. Once you do that, you're starting to cross into that territory of turning single family into multifamily and kind of looking like some of those like old school motel Route 66 style developments that we saw throughout middle America. And I don't think that's going to be a politically palpable thing or something that anybody really wants to see. I think that if that was going to be the case, it would be likely that the property would need to be split into multiple parcels to allow that. What restrictions on who is allowed to live in an ADU mean? Is that a euphemism? So that is really thinking about would there be restrictions. So right now the restriction on who, with the way that the current ordinance is set up, is that it has to be somebody who is a blood relative of the property owner and the property needs to be owner occupied. So in that case, the who would be who that person is, who would it be restricted to. There could also be restrictions around age restrictions around income, things like that. So it's not necessarily a euphemism, but it is a little opaque because it's has a lot of different ways that could play out. There is a question on would it be restricted to single family lots? I can't say with 100% certainty as of yes. I think that is a very likely situation moving forward. And a question about, does the city council have the final say on this, or would it be up to the mayor? This is something that the council would need to vote on and approve as part of any ordinance. And unless Darlene, you have anything else that you would add to that would further clarify that. But my understanding is this would go through some boards for approval first, and then go to the council for final approval. And there would be public hearings all throughout that process. So once you guys are able to see the details of all of this, you'll be able to have a chance to have your say in public on the record, and make sure that your councilman, the mayor, know exactly how you feel about it, what you like about it, and what you don't like.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. I mean, typically our process, so this would be a zoning change and an zoning ordinance change. That requires a recommendation from the planning board and a vote from the city council. We typically have a joint public hearing with the planning board and the city council, although that's not required, but I think the boards appreciate being in the room together and hearing each other's questions. And so then the planning board would make a recommendation, and then the city council would vote after that. Zoning ordinance changes can be submitted from the administration, but also from anybody can submit a citizen petition. So but yeah, I mean, this is more coming from an administrative aspect. We expect to work out these details and then come to a decision about recommending that this be reviewed as an ordinance change.
Thank you so much, Darlene. A reminder to anybody that if you have questions, please do so by typing them in the chat so that we could take a look at them. There's a question about would there be owner-occupied restrictions? As of right now, there is. We're not sure if there will be moving forward. So that is one of the things that we're looking at as far as a potential policy change. If an owner occupant following up on the question, if an owner occupant in a 2 or 3 family property installs an ADU and then decides to buy and move into a single family, how would that affect the ADU? Those are definitely questions that we would have to take a look at as we're figuring out how to craft the ordinance. Like anything else, if you rent a space and that space is sold to somebody else, they are not just buying the property, they're also buying those legal agreements that go along with it. So unless the new owner is offering a financial incentive or something else to allow the tenants to terminate their lease, they would be the ones who are responsible for inheriting that lease as well. There's a question about if the homeowner would be solely responsible financially for the ADU costs. I think in almost all cases that would be yes. I don't believe the city of Beverly has any other kinds of like financial tools or loan products that they offer or anything like that. So I think likely paths forward would be pursuing a construction loan or a mortgage on the home or something like that. But we're looking at figuring out ways that we can communicate to homeowners what the appropriate avenues would be and all the different ways that they could go about financing a project like this. Because it is a challenging thing to try and make sense of it. It's not something that a lot of people are familiar with, and it's certainly not something that all of the banks are familiar with. There's a question on the timeline to get an ordinance change. All that I can speak to is that we're really hopeful that our work done on the ordinance drafting will be done around the end of June, early July. After that, it's going to go to the city. Their legal people are going to take a look at it. They're going to draft everything that they need to do and actually get things moving forward. So we're hopeful that late summer, early fall is a likely estimate of when this is likely to happen, assuming things do go through. And aside from that, we don't have any other specifics that we can have at this time. But I know the city is going to be very diligent about making sure that everything is communicated with everybody and making sure that people are aware as to when this will come up for discussion and public hearings and things like that. There's a question following up on your question on splitting off and selling an ADU in the future. If the property is large enough by zoning and frontage to be split, would you still never be able to split the ADU off as a separate parcel? That is a very specific question, and I think it's challenging to answer something like that in a generality. I think that if you're taking a look at something like that, you're also looking at some other like potential requirements like curb cuts and main street access and things like that. I think it would be a challenging thing to do, but it would be something that we would have to take a look at an individual parcel and see what's going to happen. I don't think it's likely that we're going to see, hundreds of these pop up over the next couple years. I think people are going to look at them as something that they can be part of and have part of their lives long term. And I think we're likely years, if not decades, away from facing a serious question like that we really need to be able to figure out. And it's going to be very, very location and situation specific to be able to answer something like that. There's a question on would opposition to building an ADU from neighbors make the homeowner's request null and void? And that is something that will really depend on how we decide to go through what the regulatory process is for how this is put together. So if it is something that is allowed by right, the same way that you may be able to, change the roof on your home, then it wouldn't require any kind of comments from the neighbor or anything like that. If it requires a special permit to build, then the neighbors will have a say at a public meeting as to whether or not they support or oppose this project. And I can't speak with any such certainty as to whether it would make the request null and void, but it would be up to whatever board is hearing that special permit request to be able to say, what, these are the evidence, this is the facts that we're finding, and the neighbor's request is either valid and the design needs to be changed to make sure that their concerns are abated, or they might say, what, the concerns that the neighbors have, we don't feel are feasible or in the line with reality, just like anything else. If somebody's requesting a variance or a special permit to do something else. So we don't know exactly what that's going to look like just yet. That is something that we are strongly considering, this balance between making sure that the neighbors are respected and making sure that not someone isn't going to do something that becomes a nuisance, but also making sure that the property rights of the person who wants to build the ADU are respected as well. So we are trying very hard to make sure that everything is being discussed. If anybody has their hand up in the chat, please make sure that you're typing the question into the chat so we can take a look at it and respond. And thank you so much to everyone who's decided to join us tonight. We really do appreciate it. It is the folks like you who have decided to come out on a weeknight and spend the evening with us that really makes this impactful and really helps us in our decision making as we are working hard to make sure that we're doing something that's really going to be reflective about what works for you. And of course, thank you to Councilors Bowen and St. Hilaire, and to everybody else here, Councilman Houseman and Rand. Thank you guys so much. It is really, really important that we're hearing from everybody about this early on, and we want to do everything we can to make sure that everybody feels informed and part of this process. And I am personally a very big believer that anything that is done for somebody but not with somebody is done to somebody, and we don't want to do this to you. We want to do this with you. We want to make sure that everybody is brought along with us throughout this process, and that you really do feel as though this is the kind of thing that is going to be helpful. There's a question about if we've looked at the ADU policy recently adopted by Salem. Yes, we have. We have ongoing conversations with Salem. I had an email with them yesterday asking if they could get us some hard numbers as far as how many ADUs were adopted and what their likely costs were and things like that. And we're looking at other ones from around the region as well. So lots of conversations with people who are really passionate about this sort of work and are really kind of steeped into it. We want to make sure that everybody who is here has a chance to get and stay involved moving forward. So please make sure if you registered for this Zoom panel, we'll make sure that you're signed up for a mailing list. Make sure that you are passing this along to everybody else who you think would have some thoughts to lend or be interested in understanding what we're doing. You can reach out to Darlene with the city or myself. These are our email addresses right here. And please tell your friends, neighbors, any organizations that you're part of that this is going on. Give our team feedback on the goals and the focus of this effort. And of course, we saw a lot of conversations earlier about people who have been in a position where either they have an ADU or they know somebody with an ADU, or they've stayed at one or something like that. If you have good stories to share about what your experience has been like as an ADU owner, or somebody who has a friend or somebody who has lived in one, please reach out to me and let me know. I want to hear about how this has affected you, how this has affected your worldview, how it's affected the way that you are approaching all of this. And that very much goes for positive or negative. We definitely want to hear the positive stories here. And at the same time, we want to hear your concerns. We want to hear what sorts of things you might be afraid of. We want to make sure that whatever it is that's going on, we can capture that, we can get that into the ordinance, and that we can get that right. We really, really, really want to be adamant about getting to that point and making sure everyone feels as though they're well represented here. So thank you all very much again for joining us. It has been an absolute pleasure for me to be able to spend my evening with you all. And, I hope that you all take care and continue to do what you can to stay safe and, work on your self-care rituals during this really challenging time that hopefully we're kind of at the end of. And if anybody has any other closing comments on my team, Christian or Darlene?
No, I just wanted to thank everybody for being here and for participating in the chat and the live polls. It's helpful. And I guess I will also say, since it seemed like a lot of people were in support of this, if this is something you supported, then it's important for you to come to future meetings too, or to make your voice heard. I think that's sometimes a challenge. We don't always hear from the people that are supportive of things. So
it definitely is. So thank you to all of you so much who came out. Thank you to everyone on my team. Muchísimas gracias, Brian. We really appreciate you being here as well. So thank you all so much. Please have yourselves a fantastic evening. I'm looking forward to a lot of other great conversations with you all in the near future. Thank you. Take care and have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.